The headmistress shifted a bit to where she won't be heard. She asked what the pupil looked like. The description fitted that of Naomi. She slowly brought down the phone. She didn't know how she was going to tell the couple that their only daughter had been involved in a life-threatening accident. More still, no one knows where she was carried off to by the man who had knocked her down. The headmistress just kept staring at Bright, who was consoling Sandra, who cried bitterly. It seemed like Anita's mother just told them Naomi wasn't with her. A tear almost dropped off the cheek of the headmistress in confusion and pity for the couple. Earlier, when Naomi was hit by a speeding car, the man who had knocked her down came down from his car immediately. He saw Naomi lying down almost lifeless, and without wasting time, he carried Naomi into his car. He reversed his car and drove off. He was praying so hard that she doesn't die before he gets to the hospital. David was on the phone, talking with a business associate. He had actually come for a visit and was going back to his city. He didn't see Naomi. He was lost in the call he was making. He only heard someone's loud cry which drew his attention. But before he could step on his brakes, he had already knocked the little girl down. So he immediately came down and carried Naomi into his car. He didn't want to take any chances in saving the life of the little girl. What kind of temptation is this? David asked himself as he drove quickly to a hospital he knew distant away. He was sweating profusely as he drove at his maximum speed. When he got to the hospital, he carried Naomi into the hospital. She was already bleeding from her mouth and her head. It seemed like Naomi's head had first landed on the iron in front of his jeep without falling to the ground. The nurses took charge immediately. The doctor was busy with another patient. When he was told of the emergency, he quickly came to see the new patient. David was pacing around the hospital. He didn't know what to do. The doctor was really taking quite long inside the hospital room, and David grew anxious by the moment. He didn't want to hear any bad news. The doctor came out with a sad look. David walked up to him to ask him how the little girl was doing. The doctor looked at David and shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir. The accident was really fatal. We examined her thoroughly and found that she has internal brain bleeding. We have tried to control it with some drugs and injections. She needs immediate surgery for her to survive," the doctor said in a very concerned tone. "A surgery? Go ahead with the surgery, doctor. The money won't be a problem. I will sign any document necessary. I don't want that little girl to die, please, doctor," David begged with his hands together. "I'm sorry, but we don't have the necessary equipment here. You will have to take her somewhere else. I will give you some written notes." David didn't know his way around where he was. He didn't know which hospital had the equipment that was needed for the surgery, and so he decided to take Naomi to his city. He needed her to get better before starting to look for who her parents were. David asked the doctor if he could take Naomi on a 4 to 5 hours journey drive to another hospital from where he came from. The doctor gave his approval and gave some written notes to David and gave another injection to the little girl. Back at Naomi's school, "Sir," the headmistress called out softly to Mr. Bright. Both Mr. Bright and Sandra immediately turned to see why the headmistress was calling. "I just received a call. Your daughter, Naomi, was involved in an accident." "My daughter was involved in an accident? Where? Where did it happen?" Sandra ran and held the headmistress, asking her impatiently. "Few minutes down the street," the headmistress answered. Sandra ran off immediately towards where she was told, without waiting for the rest. Mr. Bright immediately followed his wife, running towards the said accident scene. When they got there, they were told that the man who knocked her down had taken her. Maybe he had taken her to the hospital. Since no one knew which hospital Naomi was taken to, the teacher, the headmistress, and the couple stopped a taxi and left for the closest hospital. In the taxi, Mr. Bright wanted to burst out to the headmistress, but he knew it was all his fault. Sandra held Bright tight, hoping for her daughter to be in the hospital as streams of tears rolled down her cheeks. Both the teacher and the headmistress also hoped that they would find Naomi in good health. When they got to the hospital, Sandra was the first to run into the hospital. She asked the nurses if they had seen a little girl in school uniform who got involved in an accident. The nurses checked and there was no record of a little girl involved in an accident. Sandra was disappointed, but still moved on to the next hospital. By the time they got to the third hospital and asked about the case of a little girl who had an accident, they were told that a little girl who fitted their description was brought into the hospital. It was a big hospital, so they were asked to wait while they find which ward the girl was taken into. Sandra was relieved that finally she was going to see her only daughter. She only hoped that Naomi was okay. They all waited impatiently for someone to come and take them to see Naomi. Then the doctor came out. He came to see those looking for the little girl. "Doctor, how is my daughter? Where is she? Can I see her?" The doctor was asked by Sandra in tears. "Yes, doctor, please, can we see our daughter?" That was when the doctor realized that those standing in front of him were the parents of the said girl. "I'm so sorry. Are you the parents of the little girl?" The doctor asked, shifting his gaze from Sandra to Mr. Bright. "Yes, we are." Mr. Bright and Sandra answered anxiously and nodding their heads. "Sorry to break this sad news to you then. Your daughter was involved in a serious accident which nearly took her life. When she was rushed here, she was bleeding from her head. I had thought that was all till I decided to examine her scrupulously, and I found that she had an internal brain bleeding." "My daughter has an internal bleeding. Where is she? Where is my daughter? I want to see her, please," Sandra asked with tears rolling down her cheeks. The doctor heaved a sigh and continued. "Ma, she needed to be operated to stop the bleeding completely. I had given her some drugs and injections to keep the blood from flowing in. Our hospital doesn't have the necessary equipment for the surgery, so the man who had brought her here decided he would take Naomi to a big city so that she can be treated." "Which city? Which city, doctor? Do you have his number?" "I don't know the city he lives in. Neither do I have his number," the doctor said in a disappointing tone. Sandra turned slowly, looked at her husband, and then fell down and fainted. They tried immediately to revive her in the hospital. When Sandra woke up, all she did was cry bitterly, asking for her only child. "Why me? Why Naomi? After 5 years, God, after 5 years, you sent Naomi to me. Why this huge temptation? Where is my Naomi? Where is my Naomi?" Sandra kept saying in tears loudly. Mr. Bright tried to hold himself. His charming princess was on the verge of death and no one even knew where she was. He held his wife and tried consoling her. Sandra refused to go home. She wanted her daughter to be brought back to her. The headmistress and the teacher couldn't go home either. They just looked at the couple who were in pains and couldn't help keeping their tears back in. It was getting dark already and they needed to go back home. Mr. Bright convinced Sandra to follow him back home. The headmistress begged Mr. Bright not to take out his anger on their school as they would put their hands together in looking for Naomi. Mr. Bright wasn't in the mood to start causing havoc. He just wanted to take his wife home because she has not been herself. Going after the school was not going to bring back his daughter. He solemnly blamed himself and hoped the man brings back his daughter alive to them. Back to Mr. David. He was speeding a lot, and when he was stopped by the police, he showed them the report written by the doctor coupled with the notes, and they let him pass. He drove for hours and finally got to his city. It was already dark, but he drove straight to the hospital. He gave them the notes the doctors had given to him. Naomi was quickly taken into the theater while Mr. David made the necessary payments. The surgeon was called, and luckily he was still in the hospital. He had wanted to leave a while ago, but it was as if something kept him back. He immediately went in to see Naomi. Mr. David was in the waiting room. He was praying and hoping Naomi would come out safe. He kept pacing around and rubbing his hand on his head. His phone kept vibrating in his pocket. He brought it out and it was his wife, Tina, calling. She had called him so many times and he never picked. He picked up the call and his wife asked him why he wasn't back home yet after telling her hours ago that he was on his way home. Mr. David explained everything to his wife. She asked where he was so she would come immediately. It took a few minutes, then Tina arrived at the hospital. She went and met her husband where he was seated and sweating. She asked him how it all happened and he told her. Tina was concerned. She decided to wait with her husband for the outcome of the ongoing surgery.